pastor come to my office in maybe my first or second year of ministry and say, I have been having an affair with my wife's best friend, and it just came out. And he said, I would go drown myself in the ocean if not with the fact that I have children. So I'm not going to take my life, but I don't know what to do. Can you help me?
Pornography issue began to grow and became an addiction. And they were hoping Bible college would get rid of it. They were hoping that seminary would get rid of it. They were hoping that marriage would get rid of it. So often hiring them for a job or who's supposed to be a mentor to them in many ways. Not one time have they been asked the question about how they're stewarding their sexuality.
I wasn't trying to build an ex-gay subculture in the church, but I wanted people to integrate into the body of Christ where you are known.
Who you know well as well. But Andy Comiskey always talks about the fact that we all have weaknesses, and if we will not confess our weaknesses, they will become wickedness. They will be.
So I felt like the Lord was pointing me to gender, and I was like, oh, no. That is not at all what I had in mind, because I'd already been in, the ex-gay world for like 15 years. And I'm like, do I ever get to do anything normal or be normal?
3 things we do when we refuse to tell our true story is we rob God of his glory, we rob other people of hope, and we rob ourselves of greater freedom.
Some of these kids are coached on what to say. For example, what to say so that you can get your hormones. You threaten suicide and you can get your hormones. And that's one of the things that some parents have been told, like, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Meaning if you don't let your daughter transition to a boy, she's going to take her life.
And so obviously there's a goal, this queering of the American child, this queer theory, this religious cult that is wanting to get children as young as possible before they even have the opportunity to desist.
But seriously, he definitely rocked even my imagination on that one, because I never imagined I would go to such a prestigious university and get a degree. And so I also call it my midlife crisis degree. And most people just get a sports car, and that's actually cheaper and faster, faster to get as well as it drives faster. But that was the journey I ended up on. I never expected it. Some people thought that it was my bucket list. I was like, that was never in my wildest dreams.
That's so great. I love that about God. And for those that are listening and not viewing, Christine had held up her book earlier. And again, just say the title of it again, Christine.
It's Answers to Gender Madness. And there's a subtitle, A Quick Guide to Help You Navigate the Confusion. It's basically a Q&A.
Yeah.
And all kinds
That's really, really helpful. I want to talk to you about some of the topics that you have in there for sure. And but how can people, I think right now, this isn't like out there on Amazon right now, maybe will be, but they can get it through your website, I believe, right?
Yes, worthycreations.org is where you can find this book. And I'm hoping to get it up on Amazon soon.
Yeah, that's great. So let me just, I wasn't planning to ask this, but I did not realize the connection to Ravi Zacharias Ministries. And so could you just speak to that issue a little bit? Because of course, when right after he passed away, and I loved listening to him. I mean, he is somebody that I wouldn't, like you, I wouldn't sit and listen to for hours, but I loved how thoughtful and gentle and patient he was, and answering hard questions and questions around identity and sexuality. I'm like, I mean, the guy was so spot on. But then, I started hearing stuff, reports about him, and I thought, oh, this is a load of crap. This is just to discredit him. But then after a while, I'm like, wait a minute, and as I started looking into it more, I'm like, oh, shoot, like, oh no, this is really, there's evidence here of him not ministering and being involved in some real crap that he should have never been involved in. So can you just speak to that so that people hearing this aren't just like, okay, you mentioned Ravi Zacharias, but we haven't said anything else about him. What was that like for you?
It was hard. I mentioned him, and it's because of the scandal that broke after he died. He died in 2020 also. So Cy Rogers, who was my hero and mentor, died on April 19th, and he died on May 19th. That's how I remember those dates, because it was exactly a month later. But it wasn't until the fall that Christianity Today published a story about some women who were complaining. They worked at a massage, I would call it a massage parlor, but a Yeah. Is that what it's called? And he was a part owner, and there was some sexual misconduct. And I was angry when that story came out because I thought it was a hit piece. And I thought, shame on Christianity Today. And, but then, I think the ministry initially didn't want to believe it. And then there were some people within the ministry that there was a whistleblower. There were people that were challenging it as the ministry wanted to explain it away. And they had done so with a previous scandal, maybe a couple years earlier. It was a woman from Canada that something happened with him and Ravi, not a physical thing, but it was a texting thing, and it was an inappropriate relationship, and it was a married woman. And the ministry at the time explained it away to keep Ravi's reputation intact. But this time they weren't able to do that because there were multiple women, and these are some women who didn't even know each other that had stories. And so the Christianity Today did a thorough investigation, but then the ministry hired a team to investigate even further. And one of the people that was a real lead on this was a lady named Rachel. Is it Denhollander? Know that name? She's from the USA Gymnastics scandal. She was one of the people that exposed that doctor who sexually
from State College, Pennsylvania.
Larry Nassar sexually abused many gymnasts. And this woman, Rachel, was part of the team that helped lead this charge to find out the truth, basically, because that's what we want to know. What's true here? Because this guy had a sterling reputation, a multi-million-dollar ministry with 100 apologists around the world. And some of them were my friends, because some of the people that I went to that 1-year course with went on to work for the ministry. So a preliminary report came out at the end of 2020 saying, yes, we hate to say that this is all coming out to be true, and it's even worse than what Christianity Today reported. And then the final report by a law firm called Miller and Martin came out, and I want to say February of 2021. And I remember reading that report, and there was a lot of forensic evidence, and a lot had to do with cell phones. And he had like 4 or 5 phones, which I don't understand why anybody needs that many.
Well, now we do.
Yeah. And he had an apartment in, what country is it? He's Indian, I guess. So an apartment, and he didn't have a lot of oversight because he was very trusted, and apparently he was abusing his power. And even there was some financial things that were happening that weren't above board, like him using ministry funds to help pay for some schooling for some of these women, or at least one of the women.
Yeah.
So it was.
So there was a lot of evidence that supported what both you and I initially, and like, oh, come on, this is
we wanted to. Yeah. Yep. Well, and I was at a writers' conference like maybe a year after that, and the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today was there. And I was in a workshop where he was teaching, and I raised my hand and I said, I just want to ask you something. I studied at Ravi Zacharias' ministry in Oxford at the Apologetics Ministry. And is there any possibility that what you printed, that's not true? Because it divided his family. His wife and son said, no, these are all false, And then his daughter, who worked for the ministry, said, no, it's legit. And so even his own family was divided, and this guy said, no, there's no chance. There was too much evidence and too many people that came forward to speak. Apparently, some of these women were too afraid to speak up when he was living. So I kind of think he went to his grave thinking he got away with it, to be honest with you, Garry. Yeah. Interesting, though, the one time in my 1-year course in Oxford where my class had a Q&A session with him, I had a question on my heart to ask Ravi. And I didn't know if it'd be okay to ask, because I was going for the jugular. I was like, man, and they even told us, they said, listen, this is not a time we want you to ask apologetics questions. We want you to ask other questions, because you can go find all the apologetics answers on YouTube that that you want. So this isn't like, we're not here to have Ravi debate anything, that kind of stuff that he was known for. Like when he spoke at the University of Michigan, 60,000 people showed up. Like he would draw huge crowds. And so anyway, the question I asked him was, it was two parts. It was, I told him I came from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and that it was well, first I said, I think we have a celebrity church culture in America, and I kind of see you as one of those celebrities. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how do you stay humble in light of that? Okay. And so his answer was, he kind of made a joke about it. He was like, well, I have a wife, so that keeps me humble, and didn't really have a long answer on that. And then the next question I said, I come from Fort Lauderdale, where we've had two high profile pastors have to step down due to moral failings. In the 2014 was the first one. And I think the next one was in 2015. And these were big churches in my community. And it was devastating to the Christian community. And he said, I know both those pastors. I know both those situations. And I said, my question for you, sir, is what safeguards do you have in place to keep yourself out of the moral mud pit?
Yep. What a great question.
Well, and because I thought, and I really asked.
And what an opportunity for him, honestly.
Well, and the thing is, I asked it for the sake of the room, because I was one of the oldest people in the room in terms of these students. These are a lot of 20-somethings and a few in their 30s. And I wanted them to know, because in the kind of work you and I do, Garry, and have done in working with people who deal with various forms of sexual brokenness, we've seen a lot. I had a pastor come to my office in maybe my first or second year of ministry and say, I have been having an affair with my wife's best friend, and it just came out. And he said, I would go drown myself in the ocean if it not were the fact that I have children. So I'm not going to take my life, but I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Because he basically lost his job, his church, his ministry. It looked like his marriage was over, and he really wanted his life to be over. Yeah. And he's asking me. And I was like, well, thinking, I don't know if I can help you, but I know somebody who can. And I was thinking of Jesus, Yes. But also I applauded his courage to come and ask for help. And I know this guy to this day. And he changed careers, got into a secular line of work, did his work, the kind of work that you and I have had to do, Garry. You don't come from brokenness and say, okay, I'm all better now. You get to do your work. You go on a journey of healing, of letting God shine his light into those dark places of our heart where we are reacting to things in ways that are not becoming of a Christian. And so we've been trained to react a certain way, and where we get to renew our mind, as the Bible says in Romans chapter 12. So this guy that was 25 years ago that this gentleman came to see me. And I talked to him recently, and I said, because I saw that he was going to speak somewhere. And I said, when you go out to speak now, do you share your testimony? He goes, yeah, I do a lot of times. He was out of ministry for a very long time. And he and his wife stayed together. So anyway, we've heard a lot. And I asked a very hard question of Ravi Zacharias, because I wanted people in the room to know, you got to be mindful of this. Because that was Cy Rogers. I've said his name so many times, but he talked about that pastors would come to him and say, I got my seminary degree and all this, but I hardly got any training on how to manage my own humanity. We put these people in a pulpit, and then the people who are really gifted, where their ministries grow and grow and grow, and then we put them on this pedestal, and then they come tumbling down. You know why? Because humans were not meant to be worshiped, and we can't handle it. And so that's why we have some scandals in mega church scenarios, because they've been propped up, exalted too much. Maybe not enough oversight, not accountability. We give them too much leeway, and they start taking license or justifying things. And it starts with little things first.
Well, exactly. But it also, what also strikes me, Christine, as you're talking, you're spot on, is that so many of these pastors who have gone on to excel, some that are being just in certain areas faithful servants of God, but yet they were exposed to sexual abuse or pornography when they are 8, 9, 10, 12 years old. And that pornography issue began to grow and became an addiction. And they were hoping that seminary or Bible college would get rid of it. They were hoping that seminary would get rid of it. They were hoping that marriage would get rid of it. Well, none of those things did, but not one person so often hiring them for a job or who's supposed to be a mentor to them in many ways. Not one time have they been asked the question about how they're stewarding their sexuality. Not once. And it shouldn't just be a once and done kind of thing. It should be, this is a routine need for us to be checked in on with regard to these things. But so many people, so many leaders have not been asked the question one freaking time. So, it's tragic when these things happen. But what's also tragic is that there hasn't been enough attention, love, or care to actually mentor and coach folks along the journey to make sure that they are doing well, or they are overcoming areas that have been an issue in their life. Again, abuse or pornography exposure or addiction or whatever. So anyway, so what was his response to your question?
He talked about the 3 G's. Girls, gold, and glory, which is, that scripture talks about the pride, the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, the pride of life, He talked about those things and he had a great answer. It was like 7 minutes long. It was everything you would want to hear. And when I went back, so when the scandal broke, I asked him that question in the fall of 2016. The scandal broke in 2020 in the fall. He died in 2020. And in 2021, everything was exposed. That report was made public by the ministry, which I applaud them for that, because a lot of ministries would never do that. But they had so many people that were part of this ministry that were contributors and things like that they just said, we're going to have to make this public. And I read that report. I was grieved. But I also thought, when I asked him that question, I think he was lying through his teeth based on the forensic evidence that was exposed through the investigation. I'm asking him something in 2016. How do you keep yourself out of the moral mud pit? He's already in the moral mud pit. Yeah, but it's interesting. He knew exactly what to do. He just wasn't living it.
Yes. Yep. And so again, for those listening, viewing, this is really important stuff that we're talking about here. And honestly, as we're talking about this, and part of me is just like, okay, Garry, how are you doing at this?
Right.
Like, how are you? I mean, I have my band of brothers, and I am vulnerable with them. And yet the truth is, I think all of us, and certainly myself included, I'll speak for me, I don't like revealing, obviously I don't like revealing massive failure like I had to 4 years ago when I drank too much and looked at pornography and had to come back and talk to my board and my wife and, my band of brothers and confess all that crap. And I, from that point on, like I was done drinking anything, period. I've not touched it since. But I didn't want to do that. But also I don't even like talking about the temptation to look at something, something that shows up on Facebook or on Netflix, watching something, and I want to make excuse for some program that I've gotten intrigued with, but now there's this, stupid, this character that is immoral or whatever, or good looking or what, but the truth is we have to choose over and over and over again to pull that crap out and to talk about our weaknesses. Andy Comiskey, who you know well as well, but Andy Comiskey always talks about the fact that we all have weaknesses, and if we will not confess our weaknesses, they will become wickedness. They will be. And so it's so critical that we hear the story of someone like Ravi Zacharias, and what a heartbreak for sure from all those that were damaged by his behavior and all of that, which also goes way beyond the individuals that were obviously personally damaged in many ways, but to those that their faith that was kind of wrecked or challenged or what have you. But I think all of us need to come back to not just kind of finger wagging at, which you're not doing either, but at him, but also like, this is a great reminder of how authentic am I being? And I would say this to listeners or viewers: do you have anyone in your life do you have a band of brothers? Do you have a band of sisters? Do you have anyone in your life that you're open and vulnerable with about your struggles, about your weaknesses, about your sin issues? Because if you don't have that, everybody needs that. It's not just It's not weak people that need that. It's actually courageous people and desperate people who are willing to go out and find it, and they find new life in the process of finding that.
100%. And I used to ask when I would lead a weekly support group for men and women who were walking out of sexual struggles, I would ask in the room, who knows you're here besides the people in this room?
That's a great question.
Because we could see that you're here, but who else out there? Because you need people outside this room to know that you're, because some people, and I get it, there were sometimes there was husbands whose wives didn't know they struggled with same-sex attraction. So they told their wife, I'm going to Bible study on Monday nights, but basically I was challenging people. You need intimacy in your relationships, because the other thing was I never wanted our group to be like your relationship pool where you draw from, because our mutual sexual brokenness is not really the best ground to build our foundation on in terms of relationship, because then there can be real risk in those relationships. That's when somebody's having a weak moment. So I wasn't trying to build an ex-gay subculture in the church. And there were people who weren't even dealing with homosexuality, let me be clear. But I wanted people to integrate into the body of Christ where you are known.
Yes.
And the other thing that you reminded me of is, I think probably one of the greatest things I ever learned from Cy Rogers, and that is this, is that we cannot afford to keep secrets with Satan.
There you go.
So when I am in a struggle and I won't talk about it to anybody because I feel shame because of my struggle. Yep. And especially as a Christian leader, as people who they're looking to me for some answers and guidance and help, I feel like I got to be better than everybody else, which puts more pressure on me. And that's the problem. We put people in the pulpit and we look at them and think, you have it so together and you're so godly. Where do those people go when they're struggling with something? They got to have real human relationships, like where they can talk about hard things and their own humanity. And so for me, I had always just made a decision. First of all, I never wanted to be in ministry. I told the Lord, I said, listen, I love you. I love you, but you got the wrong girl. Okay. I mean, I'm your girl. All right. I am your girl, but not for this. I told God, you could do better. Keep looking. And whatever. He doesn't usually take our advice. And so
not at all.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, if I'm in ministry on an issue, okay, and they ended up going back to the thing that I had overcome, and now I talk about in my world, and now I go back to it, because you and I have colleagues have gone back.
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
But if I go back, then I feel like it kind of, it can be harmful to others. Who are, and I don't want to, it's not a Messiah complex. It's just more of, it can be discouraging to people, because I used to feel that way when there was a lady who I read her book when my first 2 years as a Christian, and she was formerly gay, and I loved her book. And then I heard her speak at an Exodus conference, and then 10 years later, I don't know how many years later, she went full on back. And I was like, well, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that we all go back eventually? Or does it mean that I thought, you know what, this is my walk with God, and it's my walk with God is between me and God. And so I get to keep going.
Yeah. And that's an important point too. I want to just springboard off of for a second, is that you and I both know people who have gone back that were high level leaders even. But the truth is, I probably know a handful. My point is that when a high level leader fails in ex-gay ministry in particular, or in, again, once gay, whatever the word is, whatever the term is, when people fail at that and decide not only that they've fallen or that they've had a sexual encounter or they've looked at pornography or whatever, but they're rejecting Christ and they're going back to live this life, or they're embracing pro-gay theology or some nonsense like that. There are those that do that, but you and I know, Christine, you and I know so many more. The percentage is so much higher in the upper 90 percentile of people that I know who haven't walked the journey out perfectly. None of us have, none of us can, inside LGBT or outside of it. But they are walking it faithfully. They're walking it imperfectly, but faithfully. And if they fall, they get back up and they go to the cross and they get back on the journey with Jesus. I know far more people that have done that than those that have been written up in Time magazine, or those that want their cover on some national magazine to talk about how this never worked for me in the first place and I've gone back to my authentic self or whatever. So, I mean, I just want to, for those listening or watching, I just want them to know that's my experience. I'd love for you to speak into that. But the other thing I just want to mention, you mentioned in your group, again, if any of our audience is wondering about this, you mentioned the idea, and rightly so, sometimes we have people coming into our groups that have a lot to lose by being vulnerable about what they're actually struggling with, and people outside don't know. Like you use the example of a husband coming in dealing with same-sex attraction, his wife doesn't know. I believe I know you well enough, and certainly my position and my wife's would be, hey, we're going to be working to find a way. Like your wife needs to know about this, no doubt whatsoever. But we want you to find a place of stability and some solid ground to stand on. We want you to be able to build some kind of community here, but especially in your own church environment. But man, you can't keep this from your wife, or if a wife's dealing with that, you can't keep this from your husband. Eventually they need to know, but sometimes there is the timing of that. There can be some give and take a little bit on that, but we definitely would want husbands and wives to be open and vulnerable with each other and confess, where they've been or what they've wrestled with and are wrestling with.
Yeah, 100%. I would agree with that. So, but it's, maybe depending on the situation, they might wait for there's more healing before they share or whatever.
Right.
One thing that you reminded me also, as we talk about people going back, is in the heterosexual community, there's far more people failing morally and things like that. So it's not just our community that has struggled and to stay out of the moral mud pit, let's just say. And it's sad, but we're fallen people, and so whether that's a heterosexual or homosexual, doesn't matter, whatever kind of sexual it is, people make mistakes, they do things. And God can restore all of that. And I'm grateful that I serve a God who does restore and can bring healing. But I've seen people go back. And so that was one of the reasons I didn't want to be in ministry, because I thought if I ever blow it to the point where I go back to something, I don't want to drag God's name through the mud. So I would rather just work in my little secular job, because I was working at the time for a stockbroker. I would rather just do my thing and not ever take the risk of defaming the name of my Lord Jesus Christ. And it doesn't mean I haven't in other ways, because I don't always act like I'm supposed to act sometimes, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a massive moral failing versus getting upset in traffic,
Yes. But that also reminds me of the talents and how, God can call us to something and we're like, no, thank you. Like you got the wrong girl for this job or the wrong guy for this job. And we take our talent, our calling, our gifting, we take his story. I often say that one of the three things we do when we refuse to tell our true story is we rob God of his glory, we rob other people of hope, and we rob ourselves of greater freedom. And so that's also true when we won't, bring these things into the light to really encourage and bolster others. But when we have that fear that, there's a possibility I could fail, like I could get in the limelight, I could be on stage or whatever, and people get to know me as a ministry leader or what have you. And then, oh my gosh, if I have a failure, what does that mean? And so, no, I'm just going to take myself out of the running. And God would say, no, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Like you get that band of brothers around you, that band of sisters, you get those people that you're truly accountable to, and you be fiercely accountable to them and walk with me, and I'm going to sustain you in this. But when we won't allow others into our lives and we start pulling away, having secrets with Satan, you can be sure that unless that changes, you are on a slippery slope that's going to end in destruction.
100%. Yeah. So, because I think, go ahead. No, you were going to ask a question.
Well, I really want to kind of shift to talking more about your book. I mean, it's so helpful. Yes. Questions and answers on gender madness. One of the things that I was struck by right out of the gate is in your the first part of your book. One of the questions in the first part is what's a biblical view of gender?
As much as I didn't want to be in ex-gay ministry, I also didn't want to talk about gender. I was finishing Oxford. I was praying about what's next. And I was asking the Lord, I was looking at Isaiah chapter 61, where it says, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. He's anointed me. And there's like 4 things, like preach good news to the poor, set the captives free. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
And I said, Lord, what am I anointed to do? And what do I bring to the body of Christ? And then he showed me, the gender issue and my own journey. Because before I was ever gay, I hated my body for 20 years. So that's not any ROGD, which if you know what that stands for, rapid onset gender dysphoria, that's where teen girls suddenly decide it throws the parents off guard, because it's like suddenly these girls who are very secure and comfortable in their gender, out of nowhere, these are my new pronouns, this is my new name, and I want a mastectomy or hormones or whatever, like out of nowhere. And these parents are like, what is happening? So a researcher came up with this particular diagnosis because prior to that, that wasn't a thing where suddenly teen girls would decide they want to be a boy. And I wasn't one of those. For 20 years, I wanted to be a boy.
Yep.
And so
I think that was based on Lisa Lippman's research.
Lisa Lippman's research, absolutely, yes. And so I felt like the Lord was pointing me to gender, and I was like, oh, no, that is not at all what I had in mind, because I'd already been in, the ex-gay world for like 15 years. And I'm like, do I ever get to do anything normal or be normal?
Right.
or
stand up. You can do that sometimes.
I was like, do I ever get to do anything easy? And my friends were like, Christine, you'd be so bored with easy. And I was like, that's probably true. I need a good challenge. So anyway, I felt like he was directing me somewhere, and I was like, okay, whatever, and, anyway, so that's why it made sense to me, is because of my own journey through this. My favorite chapter in this book is chapter 3, which was never meant to be a whole chapter. And it was born out of the question. I was tasked to write this book by Coral Ridge Ministries, if you're familiar with them. That used to be Dr. D. James Kennedy. They're the publisher, Coral Ridge Ministries. And they wanted to offer it on their TV show for when they were highlighting the transgender issue last year. And so they wanted a Q&A. It was supposed to be like a booklet. And then I wrote more than what would be a booklet. So I consider it a book, although I have a few friends who were like, how's your pamphlet coming, when I was writing it? I was like, it's not a pamphlet.
No, it's not a pamphlet.
One of the questions, was, my daughter says she's a boy, what should I do? And when I wrote the answer to that question, it was a lot longer than all the other questions. And I thought, well, I need to shorten it, because I was trying to do, you're trying to make chapters and you're trying to make it like everything about the same length, but this one was so much longer. So I reached out to a colleague of mine and I said, where would you cut this? And I sent him what I wrote, and he said, I wouldn't cut it. And I said, oh man. So I thought, I don't know what to do. And that ended up morphing into its own chapter. And I got the idea from, the book, it's Eat This, Don't Eat That. So I called it the do's and don'ts of parental support. So this is a very practical chapter, where it says, do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. Like, do pray, don't panic. That's basic, right?
Do improve communication. Don't dismiss feelings. That's another great one.
Yes. Do seek encouragement from other parents. Don't suffer alone.
Yes.
Do get educated. Don't affirm, meaning don't affirm your child's new gender. Find out what's going on, learn about this stuff, because it's really interesting. When you start to dig into this, you realize there's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of, this is not an issue that's based in science. And there's some of these kids are coached on what to say. For example, what to say so that you can get your hormones. You threaten suicide and you can get your hormones. And that's one of the things that some parents have been told, like, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Meaning, if you don't let your daughter transition to a boy, she's going to take her life.
That's what Chloe Cole's testimony is, that her parents heard that very thing. Yep.
That's what they were told by the therapist, by the trained professional.
Yep.
Okay. So now that 5 countries in Europe have stopped transitioning children, you know what's really interesting, Gary? We don't see a rash of suicides. Mm-hmm. So if that were true, and these kids didn't have access to transition anymore, then we would see a trail. That is a threat not based in reality. It's an idle threat. It's emotional blackmail. It's manipulation.
And of course, nobody would say it's never happened or this doesn't, but it's the idea that it's happening en masse, that it can really be used as a cudgel to drive parents. And of course, what parent wants to either hear that or think it's even a possibility? But then when you have the quote unquote professionals coming along and reinforcing it, it really is so frightening. And so many parents, that's what's so annoying annoying is a horrible word. What's so disgusting about the way that this has been leveraged, and then to turn around and say, well, you signed the paperwork, you had informed consent, not when you're pulling this kind of crap and fear mongering basically around this issue. So we do part of this podcast is a weekly podcast. We have 100 and I don't know, but when yours is released, this one's released, it might be 120, 118 something. But I interviewed James Lindsay recently, and Dr. James Lindsay, and he's not even a believer. I've only interviewed 2 non-believers ever in on the podcast, but he's on a journey, and at one time I read that he was an atheist, and I asked him about that, and he's like, well, no, I wouldn't describe myself as an atheist. Actually what he said is, Charlie Kirk makes me say, but he says, I'm an agnostic, but I'm incredibly faith friendly. And as we were doing our podcast, like, he's rattling off, he's in the word, like he's reading the scriptures, he's rattling off verses about one thing or another. I'm like, I think you might be getting a little closer than, but his book that I interviewed him for was, he co-authored it with Logan Lansing. And the title of the book is The Queering of the American Child. And I can't recommend strongly enough for Christian parents to get a hold of that book and understand all that they're talking about in that book is ideology, ideology, ideology. They're not trying to stir up animus or bitterness toward the LGBT community or toward, or to the person next door in your family at all. But what they are doing is pointing out there is what they refer to as a religious cult called queer theory that is in the school systems. It's gotten its way into mental health in many respects. It's everywhere. And their book is just full of quotes from the fathers and mothers of queer theory. They're just, here's what they wrote. Here's what they said they believe. Here's how they're going to enact this. And here we are living it out. So anyway, there's others that I've interviewed, moms, dads. Jeff Younger was on our program talking about his son being trans by his mother, they're now divorced, but he's desperately fighting to try to keep his son, without chemical and surgical, without castration and that kind of. And we're not even sure where that's at with his son. But my point is there are a number of other programs on our podcast that speak to these issues. But your book and your life, Christine, is so, again, you're not a dime a dozen. I mean, your story and your life and the way that you live it out and your heart for the Lord and your yes to obedience. I mean, I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can be is to choose. Look, I don't, like you said earlier, I don't want a God that I can carve out of wood. I don't want a God that I can manipulate, or a God who's somehow as a peer or something, or is just a buddy. No, right. If he says this, I want to come into alignment because he knows he's the author of life. He's the designer. So again, I think your story is so powerful. What are some of your other, I don't want to stop you from kind of hitting some of the other highlights of your book that you want to touch on though?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was a privilege to write it. And I did get that book that you were talking about probably in my, bibliography. I quoted a lot of different people in this because I wanted parents to know, and it's not just for parents, but I was thinking of them because they're for sure. So like, how do I deal with this? And like we just talked about, Chloe Cole and how many other parents have been told stuff and they went down a road that led their kid to harm. Yes. And now we have the detransitioners, which God bless them, that that some of them have done harm to their bodies, but they're realizing, wait a minute, this is not the right road for me. So, right. Talking about, the whole thing was so interesting and chapter 3, I mentioned already, but when someone you love says they're transgender, I can't even say it, but how can I show love and not compromise truth? The question that many people ask about, should I be kind and use preferred pronouns? No. In fact, I quoted Laura Schmaltz Perry on that when she talked about how her mom would always still call her by her given name, not, how they call that dead naming. Yes. So her mom would never use the new name she gave herself, but that it really, it got her attention. It helped her. In fact, so she was trans. She was becoming a boy. or a man living as a man. And she says, this is what she says, right? I encourage you not to compromise on the truth. Like many transgenders, I demanded that my family call me Jake and use pronouns matching my chosen gender. It used to infuriate me that my mom never would. I was so angry. I wouldn't talk to her for months. And yet it was like a tether to reality for me.
Yes.
Because she kept calling me Laura. It reminded me of who I was. It was as if God refused to let me go, no matter how hard I tried to let go of myself. Yeah. I love that. And Miriam Grossman, I quoted her, and she's brilliant.
She is.
She says, to call a man she is not a kindness. It's a concession to a scheme to control our beliefs and advance an agenda, one pronoun at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
we have to love better than the sloppy offering that the world dishes out, as well as many churches. And I think there are a number of churches that actually are trying. I think even some that were confused for a while have come back from the the edge of the cliff a little bit. Some have gone right over, but there are some that have pulled back and realized, wait a minute, this is. So some of my friends, and you may be very aware of this too, are understanding and referring now to the first stage of transition. There's 3 primary stages: social transition, chemical hormonal transition, and surgical. And they're understanding and communicating now that social transition is a form of medical intervention, because so often when children are allowed to socially transition fully with no one intervening in that, or like Laura's mom, not giving into that, it so often sets them up for the next stage, which is chemical, which so often sets them up then for surgical transition. It's the nonsense that's being said is, we're just putting a pause. We're just going to do puberty blockers, pause, and we're just going to do a pause. That's such crap. Puberty. That's so untrue.
Yeah.
No, you're putting on them on the conveyor belt of
it is, and you're moving right toward. You're pushing them toward taking those other steps, and so it's not a good idea. Another one of the things that I got into in here that I thought was kind of fun for me to unpack, which is conversion therapy.
I wanted to ask you about that too.
Well, and I talked about the difference between that and reparative therapy, which is what it was really named by the founder, Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. Right. It was a form of therapy that he came up with, a technique that he used in working with men who were homosexually oriented, who didn't want to embrace a gay identity. And it's well researched, and there's data and all of this. And yet it morphed into what they called conversion therapy. And I remember talking to somebody, actually when Cy Rogers died, there was a reporter, he did an article on Cy in Christianity Today, and he kept using the phrase reparative conversion therapy. And I called him and I said, hey, listen, first of all, Cy was never a therapist. And I would argue, if you're going to be a conversion therapist, you have to be a therapist first. Like, I cannot be a jazz musician if I'm not already a musician.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And I said to the guy, the reporter, I said, it's a made up term. He goes, well, I know. He said, but I didn't know what else to call it. I go, well, don't use a term that's completely made up, because here's the thing, conversion therapy, is so inclusive. It's not defined that it can be anything. I could say, hey, Gary, could you pray for me? I'm struggling with something and I need a little, This
is how Canada has defined conversion therapy. They've outlawed even a pastor praying with somebody who comes to them. That's conversion therapy.
Meanwhile, we're taking away a client's right to do what they want to do in terms of
self-determination.
Living in a congruence with their faith.
Right.
So I unpacked the history of the difference between reparative therapy and conversion therapy. So for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a real thing. You get trained in it and you go do that.
That's right.
You don't go get trained. There's no training for conversion therapy because it's not definable.
That's right. It winds up being the carpet that everything gets swept underneath and dropped down, and it's built up as the boogeyman. And then all these kind, generous, loving approaches to people of talk therapy get swept up under it, and the laws that cover it, and people are afraid. Counselors are afraid to work with people. Pastors are afraid to even address the issues, which they need to be to stand up and be strong and do it anyway, and help people by the power of God. So, yeah, I'm so glad that you addressed that issue. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I remember when your book was, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, before you move on from that, what's interesting on conversion therapy with regard to transgender, think about that. So if I help a child stay in their biological packaging, I'm called a conversion therapist.
Yep.
But if I help a child change their gender, I'm a gender affirming therapist. I'm affirming their gender. And it is confusing. It's a linguistic shift, nightmare that should not be happening. And so the problem with the conversion therapy ban, and my friend, Dr. Julie Hamilton, you've met her, I think, right?
I love her. Yeah. We love Julie.
She's great. And she sued Palm Beach County in Florida because of their conversion therapy ban, because it was written so broadly that if a child was in her counseling room and was questioning their gender, legally, she could only help a child change their gender. She could not help a child be secure in his or her gender.
That's right. Well, and so let's be clear about that too. So, and she said this, she was on one of our very first podcasts. She could help a child, or let's just say anyone in general, a therapist or pastor, whatever, could help a child become secure in who they are. Or let me rephrase it. It's outlawed in many cases for them to do that. In our country, in some places where those bans are for minors, it would be counselors would be banned from it. But they could put them on a conveyor belt to permanent, lifelong medicalization, and they will never achieve. It's impossible for a boy to become a girl to become a boy, a man a woman a man. But they could go on this process and forever be mutilated, and in some cases sterilized and all kinds of things. That's perfectly fine from the secular perspective around this, but it is absolutely anathema to work with a child. And also, when we know that studies show that 85, depending on the study, that 85 up into the low 90 percentile of children will desist on their own without even intervention. And so obviously there's a goal, this queering of the American child, this queer theory, this religious cult that is wanting to get children as young as possible before they even have the opportunity to desist.
Yes, 70 to 98%, depending on what study you look at. If you let the child grow to adulthood, they grow out of their gender dysphoria and they feel comfortable in their biological sex. So if we could just leave them, let them have their childhood, we'd be so much better off rather than handing out hormones and cutting off body parts that are never going to grow back. And we're going to have a tsunami of regret with detransitioners in just a few short years.
Yes. Well, we already have that. And again, it's just going to increase, as you're saying. So all of this conversation, it should not spark in us as believers, for those, again, joining us for this. We don't want to stir up animosity toward the LGBT world or community or toward individuals. But what we do want is to, again, separate ideology that is so demonically driven and that human beings are confused and caught up by. Some believe they're actually being truly kind and gracious by supporting this because they're confused, they've been lied to, they've been manipulated. But we need to understand as Christians, have our eyes wide open, be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. We need to have our eyes wide open to what's going on in terms of this ideology, this tsunami, as you said earlier, coming against us. But also we need to know how to be prayerful. And this should also back us up to say, how am I personally doing in my own sexual integrity and in integrity really in every way in my life? How am I doing in that? What kind of band of brothers, band of sisters do I have? Am I living out James 5:16 of confess our sins to one another and pray for each other that we might be healed? Are we living that out? It's so much easier to grab a stone and start throwing at something that we disagree with or that disagrees with the Bible or whatever. But we need to kind of flip the mirror around and look at ourselves too, first and foremost, and really make sure our hearts are in a right place to address some of these issues within our family, within our community, within our neighbors, our workplace, whatever. And that really is what we want to engender and foster, certainly through these podcasts. So, Christine, it has been awesome to be with you. I always look back on the conversations that I've been, with you at different conferences or whatever, and they've always been fun. But this has just been a great reminder of how much I enjoy getting time with you. So, is there anything that you would like to share that maybe has popped up that you haven't yet been able to share with the audience? Anything you want to kind of leave with them?
Well, I mean, I would just say, this is that part of my journey, which is learning that God meant that my gender to be a blessing and not a burden. Yes. That was a hard road for me to figure that out. But once you get to that place, it's so liberating to know that because I saw my biological sex, because gender has been misinterpreted so many times or redefined that we don't even know what it's called and what it is anymore. But so my biological sex, I saw it as a liability. But today I love being a woman. I feel comfortable in my skin as a woman. I do have insecurities about things like even fashion. I have a younger sister that I still rely on to say, hey, are these shirts okay? When I'm at the mall, I'll be like texting her pictures of things I'm trying on. But that's just part of life. I mean, it's so funny. As I got to know straight women, I shared this earlier about getting to know them and the healing that came from it. But the other thing that I learned as I got to know them is that they were all insecure just like me. So I fit in really well with the straight community and with other females, because we all struggle with insecurities about different things. Yeah,
it's so true. We have so much more alike than we do differences, right? Than we have differences. Yes. So that's beautiful. Would you just share one last time what the name of your book again and where people can find that on your website?
It's called Answers to Gender Madness, and it's at worthycreations.org. And Worthy Creations is plural. So,
and people can reach out to you through Worthy Creations as well?
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. I'm available to speak. I also write for different organizations. I write for the Institute for Faith and Culture. Yeah. And I do some coaching. So if there's parents or kids that looking for help, I'm available. That's great. To work with people, and would love the opportunity to do that.
That's great. Well, Christine, thanks so much for being with us for this episode. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. It was wonderful to get to reconnect and to talk about God and all these wonderful things.
We so appreciate the time you've just invested with us in our Transforming Congregations podcast. To join us for future podcasts, dial into transformingcongregations.org/podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.